Welcome to the Energi Show. I'm journalist Markham Hislop. The working title for today's show is Real Talking with Ryan Jespersen. My guest is popular Alberta radio host turned podcaster Ryan Jespersen. He first interviewed me 10 years ago to get my take on the province's newly formed NDP government led by Rachel Notley. Over the years, he's had me back many times to discuss energy issues and policies, but this is the first time I've had him on the Energi Show. I'll be talking to him about two general things. First, his take on Premier Danielle Smith's United Conservative government. He's interviewed Smith a number of times. What does he think of her? Second, I want you to get to know Ryan a bit better. What's his story? Where did he come from? How did he get here? And where is he going in the future? Why does he do what he does? Welcome to Energy Talks, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Markham.
Well, look, we are approaching, I think we're about 3 or 4 weeks away from the 10th anniversary of the first time that you interviewed me in June of 2015. Rachel Notley and the NDP had just been elected government in Alberta. You asked for my opinion or my insights into their energy policies, something like that. I didn't know what I did. I thought, what a great time to have you on the show, because we haven't had you on the show ever.
Yeah.
And you had me on yesterday. We had a great conversation then. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's kind of I get a kick out of being on the other side of the questions. And yeah, you and I through the years have chatted on a couple of different mediums and of course terrestrial radio and now on my show Real Talk. And I've always appreciated your ability to apply biting and sometimes searing commentary to credible insight in what's happening in the energy industry, and I know that the audience has always appreciated it as well. So it's cool to do your show for the first time.
You mean even the ones I called idiots yesterday?
Yeah, you came in with a flamethrower and started. You were just taking big wild swipes at participants in our live chat. But I think people that know you know that that's part of your MO. In your mind, calling a spade, and I know you posted something after you did Real Talk. You said, you're mad as hell at the trolls, and you're not going to take it anymore. And I think that I, as a friend, does attempt to hold you accountable as well, and remind you to look in the mirror when you're talking about the insults that get flung around. You're no stranger. You're a purveyor of those yourself, and so we had a moment of self-reflection on the show, which is good. Did I change your mind at all?
You know what? You have over the years, and then there are others, folks that you interview and, kind of mutual friends of ours, people like Max Fawcett,
Mm-hmm.
who've whispered in my ear that perhaps toning it down a little bit might be a good idea. And I have over the years. I listened to that advice and I took it seriously. So, but occasionally, God, you know,
It's okay. And Markham, when you work for yourself and you're not beholden to the CRTC, every once in a while when you've got to deploy something, you reserve the right to do so. I've always, and listen, people can land in all different places on this conversation. Some people have suggested to me that in, for example, my interviews with Alberta's premier, it would be a recent example that I'm not deploying enough profanity, that I'm not taking a hard enough line. And it's interesting right now, like bigger picture. I don't mean to be taking over this interview, by the way.
No. I brought you on to talk, so talk.
With the with the political climate where it's at right now, and I'm talking globally, and I mean the White House and et cetera, and with the way that sort of cable news is toned now as a very partisan approach to commentary and right. Sort of that almost tribal reality. I do think that there is a need for, and I think that there's a space for, we want to create one of those spaces for like respectful, open-minded dialogue. That doesn't mean wishy-washy, opinionless type exchanges. Far from it. And trust me, like, I've had my fair share of sharp tongue moments, and I've been on the receiving side as well. But I try to, approach it. I mean, unless somebody's saying something that's just absolutely preposterous, ludicrous, or harmful, let's say, I always try to walk a mile in other people's shoes, try to seek to understand where they're coming from. And I don't know, at the end of the day, I hope that it makes for a better back and forth.
You and I have very deliberately taken different strategies on this with respect to Smith, right? Because I mean, she's had me on her, back in the day when she was a radio host at 770 QR in QR 77 in Calgary. She had me on a couple times, and I moderated panels she sat on. So it's not like I don't know her at all. We haven't had
Yeah.
conversations, but I respect where you're at, because there is a limit for any journalist how far you can go if you want to maintain access. And I'm not saying that you trade gentleness for access.
Yeah, I
I'm
wouldn't
just
put it
saying,
that way.
no, I wouldn't say that at all. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I have chosen the role of really over the top critic. Not that's not right either. But really pointed criticism. Like
Hmm.
today, I called her a liar. I did. I called her government a liar in the interview I did previous to this.
It's like a heavy word to use, right?
She's not going to come on my show, and I've asked her to come on the show, and she said no. Well, her press flack said no, which is the same thing. And I accept that. If I was in her shoes, I wouldn't do that either, because it would be a very uncomfortable conversation for her. Anybody who wants her on to do an interview with her has got to be not as sharp-tongued as I am, and that's just the way it is. That's the reality.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't want to spin this or have this spun as like, that an interview lacks editorial integrity in order to preserve access of those interviews. I think it's
And I
just
wouldn't,
like,
and I'm not
yeah, no,
spinning
and
it
I know
my
you're not.
way.
I know
I
you're
know
not.
that.
I'm just calling it how I say. I'm just referencing like feedback that we get. And I think like I stand by the interviews. Interviews can always be better. You always look back on it in so many ways as a musician after a concert, or an athlete after a game would do some things differently. I missed a couple questions with the premier a few days ago, ones that I would have liked to get to. I didn't dig in enough as I would have liked in that hard 20-minute stop to talk about economic implications and investor uncertainty and things like that surrounding that whole Alberta sovereignty musing. And that's an angle, that's an example of something I wish I would have had more time to get to. Didn't talk very much about, for example, Polyev running in this by-election in Alberta now, obviously, which everybody knows about, and the riding that he'll be, Battle River Crowfoot, this riding that statistically speaking is one of the most enthusiastic in the province on the subject of Alberta separation and sovereignty and the idea of America as a 51st state. And while I certainly don't speak for my fellow Albertans in that riding, I doubt that many would disagree with my assessment. So there's a certain discomfort for Pierre Poilievre, I think, as somebody who's, campaigning to be Canada's next prime minister, let's say 12, 18 months from now or whenever. But that's something, for example, I would really like to talk to Danielle Smith about. The fact of the matter is, when you sink into something and you decide to dig your teeth into a certain angle, or a certain story in an interview like that, a feature interview, an exclusive, a one-on-one, you want to, use your time as you see best for the audience
Right.
and for the bigger picture and for the grand scheme. Like I wanted to get her on the record on a few things, like she said, for example, people can check it out on our YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcast. She says that she will not call an election in 2026. Well, we'll see, because I have reason to believe that the truth may lie elsewhere. And I think it's important to get elected officials on the record saying that they either will or will not do something. That's driving dialogue forward. So that's an example of why I think the tone of the conversation we had, which was very challenging. I asked her if she's prepared for her legacy to be the premier that takes Alberta out of Canadian Confederation. Like straight up questions. Where did you get the mandate to do this? You didn't campaign on this. I mean, that's, people, I think these days, though, aren't maybe as used to or are less accustomed to seeing people actually have like credible, reasonable conversations around a table, and they're more used to the mud flinging and the theatrical kind of
Right.
presentation of it all. And that's not the tone that, I mean, I don't know why all of a sudden you and I are talking about this Danielle Smith interview so much, but
Because I brought it up.
well, it's recent and it's relevant. And, and I disclose this on the show from time to time as well. And it's not like it's a big secret, but, Premier and I were colleagues in radio and worked closely together for, the better part of 7 years. And we worked together before that. We have a history, that extends beyond a decade. It's always interesting when somebody that you know through a different context or know in a different capacity takes on a leadership level like a Canadian premier, or with our, buddy Charles Adler, like a senator, Supriya Dwivedi, who I used to co-host a podcast with called Seriously, taking a job as a senior advisor in the prime minister's office. Like you know these people in a different context. Now they're in these senior leadership positions. And the relationship is one that's sometimes a little bit difficult to completely describe.
Let me explain why I take the approach that I do.
Hmm.
You've known me now, and we've been doing this 17 years. We started in December of 2008 in Southeast Calgary.
For independent media, you would have been one of the very first, I think.
That is correct, sir. We
Yeah.
wanted to, and it's really only the last 6 to 12 months that we've had a very large following and an audience across Canada. So this is a bit new for us.
Hmm.
But I've made my bones in this in journalism as being kind of a nerd. Right. I'm the guy that digs into the policy, digs into the interviews, the experts, and
You do it so we don't have to.
yeah. And then I try to explain it in a narrative way and tell a story that the average audience can understand. But I've been deep enough into Alberta energy policy and then federal policy and global energy transition trends and energy system trends for a long time that I now know bullshit when I see it. Right. And there's governments till from the beginning of time have spun stuff. Nobody is, perfectly honest. Every politician spins things. I get that. But this is not that. This is like, Donald Trump is not, Maggie Thatcher or Ronald Reagan. And Danielle Smith is a lot more like Donald Trump, in my opinion. And I've seen the details. I've listened, I've had off the record and on background interviews with experts and people inside her government. And I've had the drunken emails from people like her former chiefs of staff and so on, and that's incredibly revealing. I unfortunately wasn't on the record, so I'm not going to talk about it. My point here is that I know what's happening on the ground, and I know what she says and what Brian Jean, the energy minister, says, and what Rebecca Schultz, the environment minister, say. And there's a big gap. And I'm tired of it. I think there's been so much of it lately over the last 3 years that it's approaching the status of outrageous. And so I couldn't do what you would do. Because I would just be.
But when you say what I do, you mean just because I'm not like calling her a liar to her face, basically? Is that how you say what I do? Because it's not like we ignore the stories, right?
That's right. I don't mean this as a criticism of you, Ryan.
I don't take it as a criticism.
Right.
I'm just curious to see what you perceive as the biggest difference in the style of commentary. And you're saying that yours is just maybe a little bit more scathing, pointed. It's all pointed. But yeah, I mean, like you say, and I'll say this too, and it might sound like obvious, and we say this to like our, children as we raise them as well. But like, a word like a liar, like accusing somebody of lying is just it's a heavy word to use. And if the shoe fits, then wear it. And I'm not saying that, if there's evidence that an elected official is lying or stealing or cheating, then those words fit. But I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of, we have bigger picture conversations about this stuff all the time and how words like Nazi, 5 minutes before you and I started recording this episode, I just saw somebody on Twitter popped up and called me a communist. And I just it just makes me laugh because, it's like, it's ridiculous. And people, people talk about fascist. I did an interview with Dr. Andy Knight from the University of Alberta, political scientist, maybe, I don't know, a month ago, something like that, a few weeks ago, sharp guy. And he laid out why, because he had posted this thread on Blue Sky. Are you on Blue Sky, by the way?
I am, by the way. Why
are you? Okay.
On Blue Sky? Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to like put more of an, I keep forgetting that I have an account. I have to remind myself to go post on there. But anyway, he posted this big thread on Blue Sky, employing the word and invoking the word fascist and fascism, talking about Donald Trump. So I brought him on for an interview, and I said I want to dig into that in particular. I said because I know he's a credible guy. He's been like a Yale scholar and all these wild things Dr. Knight has. And I said for you to like be thrown around fascist and fascism, I know that it's not without due consideration. I know you're using the word intentionally, and he kind of laid out why he thinks that Trump qualifies as or is a fascist leader. And it was like a really interesting conversation. But the whole point of that is returning to the root of, big words get thrown around a lot now. And even just, members of the public, by way of social media. And I just think it's something to be aware of.
Well, let's talk about calling somebody a liar because this is a journalists discuss this all the time
Hmm.
because somebody might be wrong. Somebody might have got misspoke.
Sure.
Maybe there's all kinds of reasons why they would say something that is not true or entirely accurate. So journalists take the position that we cannot know the motivation of the person who is saying those things.
Hmm.
But there comes a
We
time, and
can
I think
assume.
right. So before Donald Trump, you very rarely saw a journalist call a source or a public figure a liar.
Hmm.
Very rarely. It was Donald Trump changed the game in 2016 because then it became a point of, well, my God, I mean, the guy lies like 3,000 times a day. At what point do we start saying it's a lie? The
Yeah.
volume
Yeah.
of mendacity, the volume of deceitfulness it's like a tsunami. It's not
Hmm.
a trickle, it's a tsunami. And so you have to call it out. And so with Smith, I've waited a long time. I've given her chance after chance after chance. And finally, the volume of mendacity, the volume of deceitfulness has become so significant that I think, in my opinion, it qualifies as I can now, I'm calling her, she's lying
So
about a
what
lot
are
of stuff
the
around energy policy.
like what energy policies? Yeah, I was going to ask you like where do you see the most egregious lying?
Well, I'll give you an example. Today's interview, and you can see it, my interview with economist Dave Sawyer. It'll be up on our YouTube channel, Energy Media.
Nice
And
plug. Like and
I
subscribe.
learned
Tell
from
your
the
friends.
I learned from the best. I learned from the
Yeah.
best. So what they're saying, they froze the industrial emitters carbon tax at $95 a ton, right? And there was all about the backslapping and self-congratulation and aren't we great guys? We're helping out. Dude, that industrial emitters tax is like 25 bucks a ton, $27 a ton. You know why? Because what they do is and this is a perfectly legitimate design issue. They provide credits, emissions credits, that then get traded back and forth. So if you're a really high emitting facility in the oil sands and you just can't bring your emissions down, you then buy credits to come into compliance with the regulations. And if you're a very clean oil sands plant, and there are ones that have 37 kilograms of CO2 equivalent of a barrel, and they earn emissions credits. They then sell them to you, or the government will supply them and into the market, and you can buy them and be in compliance. The government has oversupplied the market to such an extent that they've driven down the cost of the emissions credits. So the actual cost is not $95 a ton, hasn't been $95 or $80 or $65 a ton for a year. It's like a fraction of that. And I'll give you an example. Suncor Energy, which is one of our biggest oil sands producers, paid on average last year 47 cents a barrel for under tier for its greenhouse gas emissions. And then it projected for its investors out 10 years, and it said, we will be paying $1.70 a barrel 10 years from now, so like 2034. Any economist will tell you that's not anywhere near enough to actually change the behavior and have companies invest in lowering emissions. And this has been going, this is the kind of stuff that the gap between the claim and the reality is so large that in my opinion, that qualifies as a lie. And also within the context of these larger, similar kinds of things happening again and again and again and again and again.
Hmm.
So I've got lots of stories I could tell you just like that, but this is the symbol today of why and the reason why I would call her a liar. And I think it works.
Well, there you go. I'll take your word for it on I mean, but this is why Markham people, appreciate your journalism and your reporting is because like I don't know shit about that stuff, man. And we know like as average humans, like my show, Real Talk, this is real life. Like we want to treat our interviews
Yeah, yeah.
in so many ways as people talk around tables and at ball diamonds and golf courses.
Right.
Like, this is kind of like just people curious, seeking to understand stuff. But like the average human that's working outside of that industry or that's not an economist is doesn't really have a hot clue what's going on, and a lot of us, because lives are busy and people are very busy, we get caught kind of sometimes just reading headlines. We're having like a general working understanding of kind of what's going on, but if you talk to the average person, Okay, Pierre Poilievre wants to axe the tax. And then Mark Carney comes in and the conservative position on this, which I think is accurate, is like Carney comes in and steals Pierre Poilievre's platform, basically. At least the biggest one. He stole the spirit of the slogan and executed it. Like he basically did axe the tax. And that's part of the reason why they obviously turned it around and pulled off one of the greatest campaign performances in Canadian history, if not the most incredible.
Yeah.
However, here's my point. If you took the average voter or the average person and said, please actually, like in a few sentences, explain to me what Mark Carney actually did with the consumer carbon tax and how long that goes for and what the implications are and what the future might look like and everything, I don't think that, I bet you fewer than 1 in 10 people would be able to accurately answer that question.
And I'd be one of those 10. I've done work on this since 2021 when I first interviewed an economist named Danny Cullenward from Stanford University, who wrote a book about this, about carbon pricing and climate policy. And then I interviewed Mark Jackard, who's now the head of the BC Public Utilities Commission, but a very, very well-known economist when he was at Simon Fraser University. And the long and the short of it, Ryan, is that carbon pricing at the consumer level only works if you have political support for it.
Mm.
The moment, if you can't build a political constituency for it and maintain it over time, then the public sentiment shifts against it, and the policy is, for all intents and purposes, null and void. So the villain here, and I know a lot of people, sort of on the center and the progressive left, point to Poilievre as being the villain. The truth is, Trudeau government never provided the political constituency and the public support for that policy.
Huh.
And so the people like Mark Jackard would say, look, if you haven't got it, just do away with it. There are other ways of getting to the goal of reducing emissions. You can use what he calls flex regs. You can use subsidies. There's lots of ways to go about doing this that don't require an unpopular carbon tax, right? Yeah. And Carney would have known that. He's been familiar with the literature. And so you could have me come on your show, and in 2 minutes, I could give an explanation of why Poilievre did what he did, because government oppositions are meant to oppose the government. That's what they do, right?
Yeah.
And governments are supposed to build support for the policies, and Trudeau didn't do that. There's the failure, and Carney just did what was logically, the thing was on life support, just kill it and move on, do something else.
Yeah.
So.
And cut off the conservative campaign at its knees, basically.
Right, but let me finish up. This is the essence of my journalism, my energy journalism, is to dig deep into those nerdy, technical kinds of issues, and then try to come up with an explanation so I can come on your show and, without boring people to death, and do it in.
That's the key.
Explain what the real issue here.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I do.
I used to listen to Jim Rome a lot, the talk, the sports talk host, like just a legend, obviously. And he used to say to his callers, have a take, don't suck. And that's basically my assignment to the guests. Have a take, don't suck.
I have a little story about that. Back in the day, you remember Vivian Krause?
Of course.
Of course you do. Back in 2017, 2018, when she was all the rage. Charles Adler had me on a couple of times, and to talk about her, and once followed her, and I did such a poor job. Charles, he took me outside afterwards, and he said, "Look, Markham, that you can't do that nerdy, get down in the weeds and stumble over you can't do that. You've got to come back and have a narrative and a story and explain things simply." And that clicked for me. That was the point at which I developed a style where I could talk about complex topics in simple ways, tell stories about them, explain them.
Yeah,
So
Adler's
good for me.
Well, I kind of like grind his gears a little bit, talk about how I grew up listening to him. He's like, doesn't love the reminder.
Oh, way to go.
Him and Dave Rutherford, and I was like kind of the weird teenager that I did listen to AM talk radio when I was, like 16. So that I think, was a little bit different than maybe what my peers or what my buddies were listening to. But Adler, it was a thrill for me when we first started working together. I remember the first time that I did a hit on his show, on Charles Adler Tonight, Coast to Coast. And I had to kind of pinch myself, because it was like, it was just kind of one of those moments where you're like, you feel like your career kind of levels up in that instance in that moment. And,
You mean like I felt when I went on your show?
yeah, I guess kind of to say. But he's always been a wonderful friend. We are very close friends, and he offers counsel and advice, and it's kind of like a take it or leave it type thing. But I think that he's always endeavored. Like, it's interesting. I'm not surprised to hear that he gave you that feedback after,
Yeah,
and it's in a proper spirit. Like, number
yeah,
one,
absolutely.
he's an Emmy Award winner. Like, he understands good radio. Drove Canadian conversation for decades, but also, like, he wants to see you succeed, and he wants to see people
Yeah.
succeed, and he cares about people. And I mean, there is a guy like that's he's a classic example of, like, it was never easy. Charles Adler's interviewing you. He used to sort of cut through like with a scythe and just get really right to the heart of the matter in a really common sense way. That whole Canadian common sense branding around him for years really worked because while he maintained, real credibility, at the same time, everybody knew that you weren't going to get an easy ride if Adler was interviewing you. He's a master at that.
I want to talk about nerdy 16-year-old Ryan, who is listening to Charles Adler and Dave Rutherford and other
Yeah.
legends of radio. What made you weren't out carousing with your buddies, you were off listening to talk radio. Why was that?
Well, I actually had my parents owned and operated a small business, which was a medical practice. My dad was a family physician. My mom was a career teacher who was working as the office manager, basically, and did an unbelievable job on the business side. And so they would employ me as first as like a junior high student, cleaning the office, which was a good opportunity for me, good for them. And then into my high school years, actually filing charts and submitting, like entering data entry and entering, sort of filing for, what do you call it? Sending the remissions to Alberta Health Services, whatever, to get paid, basically, right? So
Yeah, sure.
doctors, they punch into the computer or whatever. At that time, it was like, Markham, we're talking like early 90s. So I mean, just these,
Let me do
you
the
have to
math
imagine
there. Okay,
these
got
like massive, huge computers, and like, it's all this, very sort of, I guess, rudimentary type software, but at the time seemed amazing. You're punching in these chart billings. I can still think of all the billings in my head. It's like a beautiful mind right now, all the numbers swirling around. But you go, and it was like hours and hours at a time. So I would just listen to talk radio while I was kind of doing this,
Wow.
doing this work. I would just sit there and listen to talk radio. And yeah, I remember after university, me and five other buddies went down to South America, traveled for about 6 months,
Oh,
and
great.
I started in Ecuador and wound up in Brazil. And it was just this incredible journey. And I came back, and I'd been back for, a couple of months, and I'm working in the back room in my dad's office. And Dave Rutherford is starting to talk about, he was talking about like deforestation in Brazil or whatever the conversation
Ah,
was.
okay.
And I called for the very first time. I went into my dad's office. I go into like the doctor's private office, and I'm sitting in the big chair, and I like dial in, and I get through Chorus switchboard, and you know how it goes. You pre-interview with the producer if you're lucky enough to get a call through. And in a couple sentences, you have to do what Adler told you to do. Have a take, don't suck. Tell him what you want to go on the air with Dave, and what you want to bring to the mix. How are you going to further the conversation? I said, well, I said, I'm a young listener. I just got back from Brazil. I've seen some of this firsthand. I'd love to talk. And boom, they put me right to the front of the line. And then I was on for, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes with Dave Rutherford, like as a caller, as an audience member. And it was just a hugely memorable moment
Sure.
for me. Yeah, so that was kind of cool. That was, I guess, how the seed got planted with talk radio in particular, was just listening to really good versions of it growing up. Also not realizing at the time, fully realizing like what a conservative slant there was on those shows, which was kind of funny. And then having my
Alberta. Neat.
yeah, well, but I mean, and then my career. So I'm a born and raised Calgary kid. I go to university in Vancouver. I come back, and then my career ultimately takes me through Red Deer up into Edmonton, and I've been here for 20 years now. And there is definitely a very different vibe in the two cities, like for
Sure.
sure. And so you kind of come to realize that 20 years in one city, 20 years in another, and I think a pretty good sense now of what makes this province tick.
I wanted to tell you, I first got introduced to computers in first year of grad school at the University of Saskatchewan in 1984.
Jeez,
We used to call them PC clones back then, and
yeah,
the big 5.5, 5.25 inch floppies,
yeah,
that you
I remember those.
and the reason I wanted to do this is because in '85 I got my first column with the Western Producer. I
Oh
turned my
wow,
my graduate thesis was all about the transition from horses and steam to tractors and combines in Saskatchewan agriculture. And
Cool.
so I had all of these stories of families and inventors and professors at the U of S and ag, and I would turn them into these 500 word columns, and it was called Farm Tech and Times. And it was a cool. You'll appreciate this. I'm years later. I'm driving through rural Saskatchewan, and I stop at an Esso station. I go in to pay for my gas, and this older lady looks at me like, I know you. I know you. It was Farm Tech and Times, my column. And my
Ah,
little black and white photo.
your little
And somehow
photo.
from that, she recognized me. And I
Yeah.
went, oh, yeah, well, this is great. I like this. I want to go back
Yeah.
to journalism.
Yeah. It makes you feel like it was all worthwhile, a little recognition.
So, okay, so that's a great origin story, man. I mean, for a career, the way that you got into it. So then you were at, sounds like you went to Red Deer was your first radio gig?
Yeah, that's right. So my first job, I was editor in chief of our university student newspaper, and then
Oh, of course you were.
that kind of opened a door for, an entry level job as an editorial assistant at the Calgary Herald, which was my first paid media job, and I loved being in that newsroom. It was unbelievable.
Oh.
It was a really incredible time. Summer of '99, it would have been 90. When was the strike? It was the summer the strike was, and
Oh, you and
uh,
David Klimenhagen.
I was Climate Hege was there. Catherine Ford was there.
Sure.
Tons of guys like Colette Derwaritz was in that newsroom. Had just kind of started. Heath McCoy, who's like gone on to have a phenomenal career as a wrestling historian and other things. Yeah, no, it was just like a really incredible opportunity to be in that newsroom. And I remember like this was back in the day when like some of the columnists had a little whiskey in their coffee mugs, and everybody was out on the deck on that big red brick building on the Deerfoot that's now I think it's like a self-storage building or something. But back in the day, there was this terrace that would overlook Deerfoot Trail, and everybody was out there
Sure.
smoking cigarettes. Like it was just like this, like it was just like in the movies, man. And I remember later at night, it was really cool. I think it would usually be about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and the printing presses would start to hum, and then they'd start to roll,
And
and it
the
would
building would
actually.
shake.
Yeah, man, it would like move the floor a little bit, and I used to stare through the glass because there was like an observation deck, and I would just watch it, and I just couldn't believe where I was working. I just couldn't believe it. So cool. Strike happens. I was a non-union position. I wasn't going to cross the picket line. So unfortunately, my time there was shorter than I would have liked because I was starting to get bylines, which was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Like I would like bring these copies home, and I'm like, this is the newspaper I read growing up, and I'm like, I have a byline in there. It was amazing. So then I had a radio job with Pattison and Red Deer. Shout out to Big 105 and 106.7 The Drive in their newsroom for just under a year, and then City TV was opening their Red Deer bureau
Oh, okay.
in the old historic courthouse downtown Red Deer. And so I was lucky enough to be granted that opportunity. I was down there for another year with them, came up as a kind of a Cub weekend, whatever, general assignment reporter for City TV. A few years later, got the breakfast television gig, hosted that for 7 years, hosted at Ched for about 6 years, and I've been doing Real Talk now for coming up on 5 years. So that's kind of the journey.
We're going to get to that in just a moment because I got a little story I got to tell. I started in as a reporter with Prince Albert Daily Herald in Saskatchewan back in 1988,
Mm.
and hadn't worked in a newsroom before. Walked in and it was like, oof, it was only five reporters, but there was an editor, a couple of editors, and the photographer, and the stuff that we did because it was only a city of 25,000. You
Yeah.
did things like check presentations.
Yeah,
You did,
sure.
oh, I don't know,
Whatever. Bingos.
the library board meeting, or
Yeah, sure.
some business had a promotion on or whatever. But I'll never forget in 1989 there was a delegation came in from Montreal to be there was they had a big winter festival, Winterfest they called it. And she said, I was interviewing her. She said, you know what? I read your newspaper today. And she said, I was astonished at how good it was for a little paper in a small city. It told the story. And she said, I'm from Montreal, and in reading one newspaper, I got a sense of your city. And I felt so proud of that
Mm-hmm. Of
work, not just me, obviously, my colleagues and the whole team.
course.
But the fact that we would be able to tell our community story in a way that somebody from a far away would then get a sense of it, I don't know. I thought that was a really useful contribution to civic life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's too bad as well. I mean, that's not actually adequate language. It's way worse than too bad. But it's too bad that those, independent media outlets or regional or local coverage is really if not dead, dying. And I still have some friends. I'm sure you do too. One of my buddies still does amazing journalism, like proudly out of Estevan, Saskatchewan, and like bless this guy, David
Yeah.
Wilberg. He's one of my all-time just great buddies. We've been in a hockey pool together for almost 30 years. And just like same sort of a thing. Like he just is passionate about that community. He's come up as a professional in that community, basically the entirety of his career. But the opportunity, I certainly don't speak on his behalf. Let me just say what I'm observing. His opportunities have been dwindling, has been the case for many, many print and broadcast journalists across the country and around the world. But it's more than just people losing career opportunities or taking pay cuts or being expected to do more for less or whatever. It's also like, those stories you're talking about. I mean, we kind of smirk when we say we covered the library board meeting. But in all seriousness, I obviously have covered a ton of trials. I mean, the first 10 years of my career was a journalist and a reporter. I've covered police commission meetings and
Yeah.
behind the scenes stuff on budget. And like these things are important, and there needs to be scrutiny and there needs to be accountability. There needs to be reporting on the record, fact check journalism. And I lament the fact that we're seeing less and less of that. I think that there are new opportunities for entrepreneurs like me and you, who create a product, have an audience, serve that audience, and are able to monetize it to make a living. But like bigger picture, the whole sort of fourth estate. I think there needs to be a bigger conversation, especially amidst all this like defund the CBC stuff and everything. It's like I'm not saying that the CBC shouldn't have budget reviews. I'm not saying that we shouldn't review its mandate. I think that's healthy. I think that's important. Like I've got lots of thoughts on the CBC, but at its core, it's so important to have the
Yes.
public
Agreed.
served by journalism, and I think it's just such an important. This is so obvious what I'm saying, but it's like integral to a healthy democracy. So if there's ever anybody that and we see it around us all the time, people that are really like devaluing journalism. And I'm not talking about I'm not talking about like opinionated sort of blowhard type, sort of like these, the shock jocks. That I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like journalism and fact check reporting. I think that it's more important now than ever before. And I think it's worth fighting for.
I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for this new brand of journalism, I couldn't do what I would do. No form of journalism, not radio, not TV, not newspapers, not magazines, not anything, would hire me to do what I do. And
Yeah.
I just do, and this, I want to get into a question I'm going to ask you in a moment about monetizing your show and how you do that. And you can share as much or as little as you feel comfortable doing, and I'll do the same because we're an open book here. I'm happy to talk about where we get our money from. But um, we, my poor wife put up with me for a long time, man, like 13, 14 years, where we basically did our journalism and then we did professional services on the side, video production, freelance writing to pay the bills. And it was not lucrative at all. So we're like an overnight an overnight success, 17 years in the making. We stuck it out for a long time. But over that time, I got to develop a form of journalism that I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly unique in Canada. I don't know anybody else who does what we do. And I think that at the end of the day, it performs, I like to think anyway, performs a reasonable public service.
Mhm.
So here's how we pay, here's how we pay things. I'll start off, self-confession here. For a long time, it was not, we didn't have any funding. About 3 years ago, the Ivy Foundation out of Ottawa came to us and said, "Oh my God, we love what you do. Can we give you some money?" And I'm not talking about a lot of money, but some money. And I said, "We'll take your money."
Just a few hundred grand.
Oh, not even. Nice try though. But you know what we said, and they agreed, and I really appreciate the fact that they did. We said, "You can't tell us how to do our journalism. You just can't. That would be unethical, and we can't accept your money if you're going to think that you're going to influence." And they said, "We'll put it in writing that we won't do that." And they did, and they have been true to their word. They
Mhm.
really have, and they've given us a little bit more. And now we're getting to the point where we're actually earning some money from YouTube, and some of our
Yeah.
platforms that we're able to monetize through subscriptions. And by the way, and I'm sure I noticed this on your YouTube channel as well. So for the both of us, folks, if you like what we do, become a member. It
Hmm.
could be $4.99, it could be $24.99, or somewhere in between. But please support independent journalism, because really it is a free press is the foundation of democracy. So for us, it's a combination of we get some foundation funding, enough to pay the bills and keep the wolf from the door, and then we make a little bit more on YouTube, and altogether it's good. So I'll toss it over to you, because at the end of the day, fix the business model, you fix journalism is always been my mantra.
Hmm.
So this is how we do it. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, like bigger picture, like I don't know how to, save like,
Oh,
TV stations that are underwater.
yeah.
I think a big part of that is like the infrastructure is really expensive and it takes a lot of talent, or automation, which is expensive as well, to run those types of operations. And, I mean, we're independent. We're a small business, right? So we operate under kind of like the general premise that any healthy small business would, which is like spend less, spend less than you earn. Yeah. So yeah, ours is, I mean, similar. We disclose everything. We don't get any foundation funding or anything like that, but I think, you can see our print advertising in this month's Edify. It's, we're the new talk radio. And, I mean, basically, we follow a format that people are pretty familiar with, which is selling advertising to targeted advertising to, I mean, folks that are looking to reach an engaged, informed, educated, Western Canadian audience. And so that's the lion's share of it. Yeah, a little bit on YouTube and subscriptions and Patreon and stuff like that, which we're super grateful for.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you just find a way to make it work. I think that multiple revenue streams is part of that, and just really trying to stay on top of delivering, like we present ourselves as the talk show of record in Alberta. I believe that to be true. I don't know anybody that's getting bigger interviews than us, or anybody that's driving more conversation than we are. So as long as the audience is here for that, we can continue to grow that audience. Then I like our chances for as long as we want to do this. And if we lose our audience, then that's on us, And so yeah, I kind of like it. I mean, it's terrifying to jump into the pool as an entrepreneur after my entire career working for like multi-billion-dollar media entities, right? These big mega media corporations. And so having done this now for 4.5 years, it's exhilarating, it's rewarding, and it's also like the hardest I've worked ever in my life.
Let's talk about that, because I got to know you at 6:30 Chad. You left after 4.5 years. When we could talk about that
Yeah,
story.
I left after they fired me. Yeah.
Yes, but there's a story behind why they fired you, and
Yeah, sure.
then how you got the idea for what you do now, and some of the challenges that you faced putting that into action. So let's start with the 6:30 Chad and work our way up to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if everybody's heard the story. I think most people have. Anybody that cares has. But yeah, I mean, whatever. Locked horns with Jason Kenney. He didn't like an interview that I did in particular with Charles Adler. And it created some hostility from the premier's office to our radio station and my show in particular. And so he wouldn't do interviews with me and this, that, and the other, and they didn't like us very much. And that's fine. I stood by it, and our ratings were great, and the show was sold out, so it didn't particularly matter to me. I didn't think so anyway. And then I did an interview with Michael Walters, a former Edmonton city councillor, and he was talking. Well, I mean, he was a city councillor at that time, and then council had voted on whether or not they were going to sanction one of their councillors, Mike Nickel, for some just ridiculous social media activity, sort of unbecoming of a councillor. And so Walters comes on my show, and he takes us kind of behind the scenes of what was discussed in the meeting, and what who was going to vote to sanction Nickel and who wasn't. And I kind of like just kind of off the cuff just took a few swipes at Nickel's comms team, because I knew in particular who it was, this guy. And white guy, by the way. A lot of people believe this to be a racially driven story because I called them these chimps typing out these tweets, right? And
I remember that.
everybody remembers like the chimps in the movies smoking the cigarettes, typing on the typewriter, right? So, but of course they effectively Nichols' team and the premier's team worked together to spin it as a racially motivated comment, a racially insensitive comment, and lobbied chorus at the board level, by the way, at the executive board level, not even in Edmonton. Like they were like going way up there, putting pressure on the Edmonton Oilers, putting people that I was working for. So I mean, it was a concern. It was like a coordinated effort, and they came for my head, and they got it on a platter, and that's just the reality of it. And also, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got fired from a company that's share price is currently 10 cents. A company that's in serious trouble, a company that, quite
Revenge.
frankly, with a radio station that very few people listen to anymore because they can't even find it on the dial. And here we are, like with a beautiful studio downtown Edmonton, running
It's
our
a
own
gorgeous
businesses,
studio, by the way. I've been
creating
in it a
something.
couple
Yeah,
times, and it's
yeah. So, but
I'm
like I will
jealous.
say, like being on the front page of the newspaper, the day after you get fired sucks. Like it's getting fired sucks, for sure. But I wouldn't change a thing, including the comment. By the way, I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, and I have to say the audience that you've built over 4.5 years, as someone who has built a number of audiences, because up until about 2012, 2013, we were more of a general news audience. We tried all
Mhm.
sorts of different things, including at one point early on covering things like the midget hockey, AAA midget hockey in Calgary. The Calgary Buffaloes, and that kind of thing. And you can build that has a certain audience size that you can appeal to, and then you run out of it. So we're going to go try something else. But we began doing more energy in around 2012, 2013, and that had, because it was Alberta, it had a lot of traction, and so that we went on with that. And then I had this academic background because of my thesis work that I'd done, my graduate work. I had to read a lot of technology adoption theory. I've told this story many times, so I'm going to go for a coffee, audience, if you've already heard this story. Otherwise,
Don't
uh,
ever tell your audience to leave.
oh my
Don't
goodness,
ever do that.
It's just like Charles Adler level advice, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, I don't think they're going to leave. I'm just making a joke. But anyway, the point is, I had a theoretical framework to understand the changes that were taking place in the global energy system, and I used that as a foundation, and I grew it, and I grew it, and I grew it over the years, and to now we have a theory of energy transition, theory of change that people like Mark Jacobson from Stanford and Kingsmill Bond from Ember and people like Doyne Farmer. I mean, these are all like world famous, energy transition experts have looked at it and gone, that's good work. We like that. So when I say, remember when I said on your show yesterday, dude, I will always, I can show my math and I can cite my sources. That's why, because I put in so much work from 2018 to now to do to educate myself, read the data, read the evidence, read the studies, interview the experts. So 8 years later, I'm pretty confident when I say something that I'm in the ballpark if I'm not exactly right.
People just want to see the receipts. They want to see the numbers.
Yep. Ask. I'll,
Hmm.
I'll, I'll give it to you. And you
Yeah.
know what? One of the things about switching to all video, which we did in January, is the feedback from the audience has been phenomenal. I don't know what about you. Well, I know you've got your live text going.
Hmm.
They're always complaining about me when I'm on your show, but we get a lot more feedback now, and people are saying you said this in an interview or whatever, and I'd like to know if you have links or you cite your sources, and most times, like 95% of the time, I just go, oh, okay, sure, and I
Hmm.
got it. Sometimes I've had to think, and I've had to go, ooh, I'm not as sure about that point as I thought I was. I need to go back and do more work. So I'll schedule some interviews with experts or whatever to fill in the gap that this reader has very astutely pointed out.
Hmm.
So the interaction with the audience is something that's fairly new in the last 4 or 5 months. I guess maybe you probably had a lot more throughout your career. It's new for me, and I'm really enjoying it.
That's great. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do, people, I mean, there's different strategies, right? If you're, for example, we release every episode, every weekday, 5 times a week, on YouTube. And then we cut it down to, highlights and shorts and everything that people want. And a lot of people, very few people have time every single day to watch like a 90-minute episode about something. We'll do special episodes that people will sit and watch from start to finish. Some people drop in on episodes, which is great, or they'll read our description and jump ahead to a certain interview they want to listen to, or whatever the case may be. But we're also releasing a podcast every single day, and the podcast has some slight tweaks to what the YouTube episode is, but essentially it's the same product. It's a talk show delivered daily to wherever people get their podcasts, and so you sort of want to be able to sort of deliver people what they're looking for, whether that's like an issue that matters to them boiled down to 60 seconds or less. Our YouTube shorts, we'll release them on TikTok and Instagram Reels.
Yeah.
And we'll run into people. This guy in the street comes up to me the other day, like made my day, and I laughed with him. I said, this is the first time anybody's ever said this to me, but he walked up and he goes, "Oh my gosh, man." He goes, "I love you on TikTok." And I was like, "You love me on TikTok?" Nobody ever like, what? But like, yeah, man, we have, I don't know how many thousand, something like 12, 13,000 people, something like that we're grateful for that follow us on TikTok. Like but that's like where they're getting their dose of talk radio. Obviously, the hope is and the plan is that they're intrigued by that 40 or 60 seconds that they see, and they maybe go to our YouTube channel or go to their podcast and listen to the full episode. But a big part of I think growing a show is like finding and meeting people where they're at. So you talk about this live chat, for example, or like the live feedback element to it. There's a reason why we don't pre-record our episodes, and that is because the live chat, although it's honestly relatively, like, I don't want to say negligible, that's a harsh word to use, but like, the participants in the live chat might represent like 1 to 5% of our total audience of a show, but their contributions to the show are massive. Like they bring in energy, they bring perspective, they'll ask questions of the guests, they'll interact with one another. Like, there's a lot. They'll announce breaking news as it's happening. Like, it's really interesting to see that. It does come with, and I'd say like our YouTube chat for the most part is pretty like sane and respectful for the most part. And, generally speaking, I'm pretty proud of it actually, that, on the World Wide Web, that ours is so civil. I will say like the terrestrial radio text line was a whole different minefield, where you just get like punched in the mouth every 30 seconds by some, whoever it was, just sending in like the most awful comments. And you just like, we were joking about this, me and my producer, John Hicks, we were laughing about this just a short time ago. Like, it kind of like, it's like this PTSD that comes with the job because you can't look away from it. Like a part of your job is to monitor that text line, but nothing's being filtered out. So that took a little getting used to. And I'm still a little twitchy when I think about that.
As we all are. Trust me. One of the things that surprised me is I've had a couple of guests, some fairly high profile ones, come back and say, "You know what? I went and looked at the comments on the interview that you did with me, and they were, for the most part, respectful and well thought out, and nobody was really rude. I mean, there's always trolls. I mean, you just can't avoid it these days. So fair enough." But they said, "I was on so-and-so's podcast, or I was on so-and-so's show, and theirs was just a gong show. This is like it was tire fire surrounded by, what I'm talking about."
Sure.
So I'm kind of proud of that, but I have to tell you, I stay away from the comments because I recognize that for a guy who's in the public eye and a journalist, I'm notoriously thin-skinned. And so my wife, who's also a journalist, we've had many conversations, and she goes, "Honey, stay away." Yeah. Don't, because
although Markham, for the algorithm, the more that you like and reply to comments, the more it'll boost your content. So you might need to pay somebody to go in there and pretend to be you.
Oh, there's a good end. Now, tell me about your producer. Let's just give some recognition to the people behind the scenes.
Well, he's sitting 8 feet from me right now. So yeah.
Hey,
Johnny Infamous. Yeah, no, he's well, Johnny and I have, it's been kind of a cool thing coming over the course of the last 10 years or so. He was the Oilers official DJ and I was the Oilers in-game host, the Jumbotron guy for I think we worked together 6 or 7 seasons. And so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different capacity. And, so, yeah, we had a history of working together in a different cap And and an opportunity opened up on Real Talk, and he's been with us now for more than 3 years, and it's great. Like, he's it's a tough job. Like, we're just joking about the live chat and things like that. I mean, like 1% of what he does is moderating that live chat, but that's its own animal. And we're a pretty ambitious, like, relatively speaking, for an independent, basically, grassroots grown podcast, like a media entity. We're pretty tech forward, and it's like, when people come in, we do these studio tours, things like that. Like, we'll auction them off for charity, whatever the case may be. Our most recent one for UCAN Youth Services at ucan.ca. We love those guys doing amazing work for young people. But we'll bring people into the studio and show them around, and people always see the producer's desk and they're like, geez, it's like a cockpit, it's pretty awesome.
I've seen it. It is.
And I'm always impressed by, like, buttons and flashing lights and things like that. So it's good, but I steer clear of it as best I can.
Well, I want to give a shout out to our other two team members, because I mentioned my wife Joanne, who does all of our video and audio editing, graphic design, all sorts of stuff. So she's got her hands full with that. And then we have MC Bredner, who's been with us for a year and was the missing ingredient for us, because neither Joe nor I are organizers, and we're not social media savants. And MC was that missing piece in the puzzle that really, completed the team and enabled us to go on and do things that we could never have done, the two of us, and didn't do for 16 years. So between the three of us, that really, this is a team effort. I mean, it may be my ugly mug out in front of the camera all the time, but boy, without their efforts, I would be nowhere.
That's cool for you to say that, man.
Well, we are journalists. We try to be true. We speak nothing but the truth. Well, look, Ryan, this has been fascinating. I'm really glad that we had a chance, because I've always thought, I need to take Ryan out for a beer, but the opportunity never comes up because I'm not in Edmonton that much.
Yeah.
But this is the next best thing. Should have had a beer on the.
You should have been. Yeah, we should have cracked beers at the beginning of this. I'll go crack one now in your honor, Markham.
Well, thank you, and I will be in Edmonton this summer and fall, and I'm going to track you down for that beer.
Good. We'll have it live on the air with Real Talk. When you work for yourself, you can do this now. We can do
that's great.
We can do booze fueled interviews at 8:30 in the morning. Nobody's going to crack down on us.
Ooh. Okay. We'll let's put that on the. Thank you very much, man. This has been great, buddy. We'll look forward to more of these in the future.
Thanks, Markham, very much. It's always nice to chat with you.
Likewise.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.